Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Arsenal back in Premier League action this weekend, and we take on a club with whom it's fair to say there's been plenty going on over the last few weeks. Nottingham Forest under Ange Postecoglou, of all people, arrive at Emirates Stadium tomorrow. And I think this has got the potential to be a really, really fascinating game. That's why I've drafted in the big boys. I've brought on the brilliant Max Scott, talkSPORT reporter, Nottingham Forest fan, a very, very good friend. And I don't think you find them more in the know when it comes to Forest than Max. So Max, thank you for doing this, mate. I know you've had an extremely busy week so far, so I appreciate you taking the time. Welcome.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, pleasure to be on chatting with you. And look, Forest, we've just become blockbuster, and that's partly down to having, the passionate but unorthodox owner that we have that is become, I think, the pantomime villain in the Premier League. And of course, it doesn't get much more blockbuster than Ange Postecoglou, with how he is in the media. So we can break it all down, but I'm excited. I'm excited for Saturday.
Before we get into sort of the Ange Postecoglou appointment and what your thoughts are on that and what you think he'll do and change, etc., I'm interested to know what you think about Nuno's departure, because there's a part of me that looks at it and feels sorry for him because he'd done such an incredible job at Nottingham Forest. But we know that if a relationship breaks down behind the scenes, as was reported, it's not always easy, is it, to recover? And sometimes there is no way back. Do you think it was that bad? Do you feel like it got to the point where there was no way back, and actually Marinakis in the end was probably right to say, sorry, this isn't going to work anymore, and move him on?
I think when you make public conversations and issues and concerns that should be private, then you're onto a hide into nothing a little bit, really. And so I've got less sympathy than I would have done for Nuno if he'd have just been sacked seemingly out of the blue. But it's he was the prime mover. He initiated this. And I am, the concerns he did have about the arrival of Edu, some of the signings, I think are completely understandable and justified concerns for a manager or a head coach. But ultimately, I've got less sympathy for him because I think he's turned the gun on himself there. And I think Forest fans will slowly begin to acknowledge that whilst Nuno is a hero and a legend in the city for doing what he's done, I don't necessarily think his brand of football would have been able to sustain us at that level. And ultimately, the ambition of the club is to be back where we believe we belong, which is in European football because of our heritage and history. And so maybe this is just an accelerated process of what would have happened anyway, let's say, at the end of the season. So we're here. I'm sad for Nuno, but less, as I say, less sympathy because I think he's brought it on himself.
And you'd almost rather that it happens now, wouldn't you? Then you kind of went 3-4 months into the season where things weren't going particularly well. There was obviously this disruption behind the scenes, and then you kind of make that decision. You'd rather kind of just get it done, wouldn't you? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think some people will say, well, why has this happened 3 games into the season? And it's because 2 days before the first game of the season is when Nuno started going really public. He did an interview with Sky saying we had major problems. In the days following that, Forest signed 11 players, 12 players. And then he continued with his criticism. And so actually, I think Marinakis has acted really fast. There's lots of questions around Ange Postecoglou, but I spoke to him at length yesterday, and this is where we are now. And so, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on Edu, what's your kind of early impressions of him? Because during his time at Arsenal, Edu came in at a time where Arsenal was struggling, right? And he came in and he was a big part of what we can call the Arsenal revolution, in that he came in with this personality, with this brilliant character, with that connection with the supporters, because he was an invincible with the football club and he was already loved and adored. And he felt like a good choice at that time. He made some good signings, some not so good signings as well, seemed to have a really good relationship with Mikel Arteta, which I think allowed them both to thrive and develop. But I think what Arsenal fans have probably realised this summer is that there were elements of Edu's leadership that weren't quite as strong as some of the more experienced campaigners, i.e. your Andrea Bertas, who's come in and done deals like that for good prices, hasn't had any problems renewing people's contracts. He just seems to be a little bit more efficient. Now, I'm not trying to criticize Edu because that was his first sporting director role at Arsenal. And I know that his role at Forest is not exactly the same. Okay, it's different. But what are your early impressions of him? Because the more I look at Edu now, knowing what Andrea Berta is capable of, the more I think that actually Arsenal letting him go, or, well, I don't know if they let him, but he obviously resigned. It doesn't feel like the disaster that it did at the time for me. Now, I'm not trying to downplay what he can do at Forest, but I'm just interested to see what your thoughts are, because he does have favourites in terms of agents that he works with. We've experienced that. And does that sometimes create rifts behind the scenes? And is that what's happened, I guess? There's a lot of questions there, but is that what's happened with Nuno possibly?
I think so, yeah. What I would say is I look at the profile of players that have been brought in, and that is exactly what Forest needed. It's my understanding that Nuno asked for 2 starting 11s at the end of last season. Well, he's only gone and got it. And Marinakis primarily, but Edu have been key to that. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt in that I look at the players he signed, and I think overall, of course, if you sign 11 players, a few of them might not work out, but largely Douglas Luiz, James McAtee, Amari Hutchinson, Dan Doy, these are good players. Or these can be really good players that can sort of, settle into a second 11 and then start challenging. I am concerned, though, having seen what's happened at Arsenal with some of the duds that you brought in for significant wages on long contracts. I am concerned about his affinity with certain agents. And so the jury's out with him. One thing I will say is that because of his severed relationship with Nuno, he hasn't spent much time at the ground. So he hasn't been able to build those bonds that we saw him do at Arsenal. He seemed to be a key feature at your training ground. He seemed to be sort of around a lot. I don't have a problem with that, because one of the things that I think Forest have thrived off is that togetherness and cohesion. So the jury's out. I have my concerns, but equally, as a Forest fan, 3 years ago being in the Championship, you look at the squad we've got, I can't turn my nose up too much at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right to mention, again, the kind of agent thing. I think with that, at the beginning, we saw it a lot with Edu when he brought like Willian in and a number of others that were all sort of linked to Kia Joorabchian. And then that seemed to die down a little bit. You felt like as more people were getting involved in the kind of recruitment process at Arsenal, Edu's kind of like desire to work solely with those guys, it seemed to change a little bit. That's why I was a bit surprised, actually, when I heard those reports about what he's doing at Forest and how he's working with certain people again. I thought you'd kind of gone past that. I get at the beginning when you're inexperienced, you don't really know where to turn. You haven't really got those connections and relationships that maybe other sporting directors have. So you go with what you know. But I would have thought by now Edu would have moved past that a little bit. But it might work for Forest. It might not. We're going to have to wait and see. Ange Postecoglou, what do you make of that appointment? I made no secret of the fact last season that I thought Ange Postecoglou was very, very, very lucky not to have been sacked before he went and won the Europa League with Tottenham, because their season was just completely unacceptable domestically, in my view. But he talks a good game. He's a good character. He's got that Greek connection, which might bring him a little bit more credit in the bank with somebody like Marinakis. Would he have been your choice, or where did he rank in terms of the list for you when it came to replacements?
Well, he was barely on the list, I'll be honest with you, Harry. If there was no list, it was all Nuno, because we're a loyal bunch, us Forest fans. And we've seen periods when we were in League One and the Championship where we had about 18 managers in 12 years. And so we are a faithful lot. But, when it became clear that Nuno was on his way out the door, and not that I expected this, but the names of Andoni Iraola, Marco Silva, De Zerbi, and how blockbuster would it been if Forest had gone and got Oliver Glasner after all of the sort of Cass appeal tension between Forest and Palace. Those are the sorts of managers that would have been on my list. But Ange Postecoglou, he finished fifth in his first season. Yes, domestically, it was a shambles for Spurs last season, but he then still won the Europa League. And what Marinakis wants to deliver to Forest and to the city is a trophy. On the steps of the sort of town hall building in the centre of Nottingham after we got promoted, he said, he acknowledges our great history, but this is about making a new history, about getting back in Europe and winning trophies, and people laughed at him. And I can sort of understand in the fickle football world we live in, where everything's fixed and it's so difficult to break through. I can understand why people laughed at him, but here we are with that opportunity. I think winning a trophy, winning the Europa League primarily, is at the forefront of Forest's mind. And Ange was asked yesterday if he still wins things in his second season. And as well as mentioning that he also has won doubles in his first season, he said, I might not get a chance at a second season if I don't win anything this season. And he said it half tongue in cheek. I think there's probably some truth to that, maybe. So I've gone on a bit of a ramble there, Harry. I don't know where I'm at. But ultimately, the concern is about style and how. That's why it wasn't at the top of my list. How can you go from Nuno ball to Ange ball? What do you think? Do you think it's possible to transition that way with Ange?
This is the thing that I've been kind of wrestling with in my mind. Like, I get the idea of Ange Postecoglou. Like, as bad as I thought his season was domestically last year, he did win the Europa League. He is quite a good, I think, ambassador for a football club, in that he speaks quite well, and you can understand why people sort of follow him. But I was looking at that squad and I was thinking, this was a squad that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm looking at it from the outside in, right?
Yeah, sure.
But when I looked at Forest last year, I saw a team that could defend really well, that were really, really organised, really, really well drilled, as all Nuno teams are, but then had that ability to hit you on the break, especially with Gibbs White dropping deep, for instance, playing those balls into the channels nice and early, pacey, tricky wingers, a good finisher up front in Chris Wood a lot of the time. And that was their kind of bread and butter. And now I look at the team and I think, yep, still pretty much the same in terms of its profile. But Ange's philosophy is so damn different. I don't know how you take that kind of step from one style to the other. Is it a gradual thing? Is it something that you do straight away? Like, will they come to Emirates Stadium on Saturday and be way more expansive than they would have been had Nuno still been in charge? Or does he go, look, first game away at Arsenal, haven't had much time to get our feet sort of under the table and get everything sorted. Let's just go with what we know and let's make sure that we're competitive in the game. I don't really know. I don't really know how you make that jump. Do you expect him to just come in and go, I'm Ange Postecoglou, this is the way I play, mate, get on with it? Or do you think he does have to acknowledge, and maybe has he learned a lesson from Tottenham, that actually in this league, you have to be a bit more pragmatic than he was? Do you think he will regret his approach last season?
I think quietly, he will have learned. You can't not learn if you're an elite manager, which he is, in the best league in the world. But publicly, I asked him yesterday if he has a point to prove, and he said, no, absolutely not. Categorically, don't have a point to prove. My concerns were yours. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Build on it. Don't rip up the sort of castle that Nuno built. With those sort of defensive systems in place. And he said categorically that yesterday, Ange Postecoglou said this is going to be a gradual change. He's really impressed with the depth in the squad, with the variance, his words, in the squad to be able to employ different tactics. I asked him yesterday why he feels he's been pigeonholed. And I asked him if people are wrong, what are they missing? And he said they're missing everything. I've played with 3 at the back, 5 at the back, 4-4-2, and people... And that's his side. Of course, there is always a counter. I wasn't going to sort of go for him yesterday in the press conference and say, well, lots of people who say that isn't the case, Ange. But he seemed to, I think, allay fears from Forest fans that all of a sudden he's going to rip up Nuno's playbook. And he celebrated Nuno and said what an excellent job he's done. And so he's played against Forest. He lost twice to them last season, home and away. So he knows that they're already a good team. And so I'm quietly confident that whilst we'll see some tweaks and won't, rip up the playlist and do something totally different on Sunday, partly because he can't. He's got 4 away games and he'll have had 1 full training session with the full squad before Arsenal tomorrow. Tomorrow. So, I'm not too concerned about that. I think maybe Ange, if he has learned, can be the development Forest need.
Do you think his outspoken style, which... at the beginning when he first joined Tottenham, we were like, oh, this is quite refreshing. You got a nice, honest guy here who comes and says it how it is. But as things went badly throughout the league campaign, it felt like there were times where he just needed for me to just bring it down a level, because I felt that he was bringing on criticism by some of the things that he said. For example, I always win in my second year. right? He was made to look like an absolute king at the end when he went and won the Europa League. Brilliant. But then he gets on a podium and says, season 3 is always better than season 2. And it's kind of like, well, you don't need, you've won, you've done what you said you were going to do. You don't need to take it further, because you say the next season's going to be better and then you get sacked 2 weeks later. Like, I feel like his outspoken style is great in some ways, but at times it brings pressure onto him. Do you think that will go down well with Marinakis? The way that, I know Marinakis knows what he's getting, he's not stupid. Yeah. But do you think there will be friction caused by some of the conversations that Ange likes to engage in versus what Marinakis is like, which is someone that doesn't want his dirty laundry aired in public, essentially?
One thing I will say about Marinakis, Harry, is that he doesn't want a wallflower manager. He doesn't want a yes man. We're talking about a really passionate, ambitious, charismatic man in Marinakis. He doesn't want a beige manager. I think he's enjoyed that sort of full throttle relationship with Nuno, with Cooper at times, and I think he'll have that with Ange, and so he wants that. I think that there is a misconception that Marinakis wants a yes man, that he wants someone that's just going to pick a team. He doesn't, and so I think that as long as it's not on a Nuno level of me and the owner don't get on anymore, and I'm saying this in public, I think that this could be sort of, whereas Nuno and Marinakis was yin and yang, Ange and Marinakis are like, I don't know, enter appropriate metaphor. I've had a long day yesterday, I can't think of one. I think it can work. And I think it'll charm well with Forest fans. We're talking about Ange Postecoglou, born in Greece, had to leave Greece, grew up in Australia, and has somehow managed to forge a career into the Premier League as a European winner. He's got a chip on his shoulder. Forest have always had a chip on their shoulder. We were under Brian Clough, we were a provincial club. No one knew who we are, and we conquered Europe back-to-back seasons and the domestic championship as well. And that has stayed with us. And now that chip on the shoulder has been sharpened by Marinakis, because we believe that we can achieve big things now, and we already have. And so I think that it could be a really good partnership and a good meeting of minds. It could also, Harry, go completely pot to pot, and who knows?
The thing is as well, like, and I know lots has been made of the fact that, Ange Postecoglou is Greek and so is Marinakis. I actually think that helps. Not because Postecoglou deserves the job because he's Greek, nothing to do with that. But I think having that cultural understanding of someone else's character and the way they communicate and express themselves, Ange will benefit from having that. I always think that someone like Marinakis, who's come to England where everybody, and I don't want to generalize, but is generally a lot more polite and things are more considered when they're sort of discussed. I think having a manager that understands that kind of red-blooded approach that Marinakis has, I think actually that will benefit both of them and their relationship. Max, we're going to take a really, really short pause. Just a quick teaser for what's to come on tomorrow's pod. You don't want to miss this episode. Here's a little clip for you.
In terms of his job at Arsenal Football Club, he was a visionary. David Dein was a much broader thinker than most football executives and most football directors at the time, and he deserves enormous credit. However, the creation of the Premier League. So the way David Dein likes to tell it, the Hillsborough tragedy was the moment, the catalyst for the creation of the Premier League. It's not the whole story. I mentioned that right at the start. I was writing football fanzines from the mid-80s because I was already concerned about the direction of football. And really from the early 80s onwards, a cabal of top clubs, the so-called Big Five, as they were in those days, which were Arsenal, a team from North London who cannot be named, Manchester United, Liverpool, and then Everton, no Man City in those days, by the way, Everton, were chipping away at the solidarity of the old Football League, the 92 Club Football League. Hillsborough may have been a catalyst in one way, but Arsenal and other clubs wanted a breakaway years before the creation of the Premier League, or at least to order the world of football to their convenience and to their financial advantage. But there were various ways in which the old Football League, which is a very sort of shonky organisation, very poorly run, as David Dean says, it was very poorly run, but they were strong-armed into giving more voting rights to the top division, to clubs like Arsenal, and more television money. And they, in the end, they did. You know, it took about a bit of arm wrestling, but they got there. But sort of by about 1986, 87, the big clubs had got pretty much everything they said they wanted. And then they wanted more.
Welcome back to the pod. Right. Max, let's talk a little bit about Arsenal before we wrap up. What have you made, first of all, of Arsenal's transfer window? A lot's been made of it.
I've been really impressed, Harry. I mean, I think, you know, when Mosquera came on against Liverpool, you sort of realise that Arsenal aren't now just buying players that can come in, that arguably should be in or could easily be in a starting 11. I was really impressed with that. I think the Gyökeres, to get Gyökeres over the line is fantastic. I don't like a lot of the, you know, sort of very lowbrow, scummy, run-of-the-mill criticism that Gyökeres has had about his weight, about his haircut, about, you know, I think Premier League fans can be very sneery at players that have had a career in the EFL. For me, that, like Righty said, that's going to make him, because he knows this is his chance and he's fought for this. I'm a big fan of Gyökeres. I'm a big fan of Gyökeres at Arsenal, because I like to see, you know, challenging at the top. And of course, Eberechi Eze is one of the most joyful, graceful, get me out my seat players in the Premier League. And so I've been really impressed. And I don't buy the narrative that you've already lost the league, that nothing's going to change under Mikel Arteta. But to answer your question, been thoroughly impressed. And we've only played 3 bloody games, mate. And people are already making their minds up about these signings, particularly Gyökeres. I'm not about that. He's already scored 2 goals in the Premier League. He scored pre-season. What's not to be hopeful for?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had a lot of that, people coming at me and going, Gyökeres is a dud. Why'd you sign him? Etc.
How do you know?
Exactly.
Are they Portuguese football experts that watch him week in, week out sporting? No, they're not.
Exactly. And my response has been where he's got 2 Premier League goals in 3 games. So
yeah, exactly.
You know, what more do you kind of want? And also, I think like context is really, really important. And people tend to overlook the really important context around certain stories because they want to be really knee-jerk, really outrageous in their views and in their opinions. Ultimately, in 2 of Arsenal's 3 games so far, they've been to Old Trafford, which is never an easy place for Arsenal to go, and they've been to Anfield. Exactly. So, you know, the fixtures are going to even out over the course of time. Like, we've got Man City coming up next week. Then we've got a trip to Newcastle on the horizon. We've got some Champions League games as well. So it doesn't get much easier for Arsenal in the short term. But ultimately, if Arsenal is still in there and still competing by the end of this run of games, then actually that would give me more encouragement about their credentials rather than tell me that they're not quite there. You know, you're going to have ups and downs and bumps in the road in the season. And the discourse around the Liverpool game for me was completely over the top. Like, were there some things that Arsenal could have done better? Absolutely. But at the same time, I thought Arne Slot's summary of the game was perfect. If you played that game 10 times, there's 8 draws. Liverpool win 1, Arsenal win 1. Yeah. That was the type of game it was. So to kind of draw too many conclusions on that for me is crazy. What do you think about sort of Saturday's game? Are you expecting Arsenal to come out kind of full throttle? Because I feel like the fans at the Emirates Stadium will be expecting that. It's just been a little bit at times, I don't know, maybe a little bit too controlled, I think is the right word to use for our liking.
I think, and you've got to remember, obviously, you know this, I'm preaching to the converted. Gyökeres came in right before the start of the season. It's going to take time for, you know, Arsenal to incorporate him into the way that they play. But I would like to see, not on Saturday, but I would like to see Arsenal loosen the handbrake a little bit. But again, that all takes time with the arrival, I think, particularly of Eze and with Gyökeres. For Saturday, I get what you mean. I think particularly with, you know, I like the X's and O's and the stats, Harry, but I'm also a bit of a football romantic, and it's about the stories and the narratives and the emotions that the game elicits. And I just sort of feel that if it's 0-0 at half time and Ange is, you know, the key figure of that frustration, then I'm hopeful that Forest can take something home from the game because, you know, regardless of the situation at Forest, we're a really good Premier League team with a really good squad who had a fantastic season last season.
Yeah.
I don't expect that. I hope for that. And I would think, you know, with my Forest hat off, that this should be a pretty comfortable victory for you boys, partly because we got spanked by West Ham at home. It wasn't actually a spanking in terms of the performance, but we completely capitulated. The club is currently still in a state of flux and transition, and I think Arsenal will probably capitalise on that. But I do have that romantic part of me that Ange is going to go and upset, you know, his old North London rivals.
That is what the Premier League's all about, though, isn't it? The
Exactly.
fact that you go into games and you feel like that is a possibility, regardless of, you know, who's the favourites and who's not. It just kind of sums up what the Premier League is and why we all love it so much. I think from an Arsenal perspective, and I talked about this at length on yesterday's pod, we just want to see a bit more freedom afforded to the players. And we want to see the team go out there and essentially play with the handbrake off. There's a few changes that I think I would make if I was Mikel.
Well, I was going to ask, how does that happen? What does that look like? Because do you sacrifice anything defensively in order to do that or not?
This is the thing. I think that Mikel Arteta, one thing that I do think he needs to do better this season is first of all, he needs to trust in his squad more. He's got a squad now that is capable of competing. And even with multiple injuries right now, with Saka out, with Havertz out, with Ben White being a doubt, with Norgard being a doubt because he was unavailable for the last few games, you know, with all those problems, you've still got a great squad there. Yeah. And you need to be able, I think, to trust in that squad because it's a long old season. And I think for me, the big obvious change that probably needs to be made is on the left flank. I love Gabriel Martinelli because he's incredibly hardworking. He's incredibly committed to the cause. He's joined Arsenal at a really young age and we've watched him grow and develop. And there was a point where even Jurgen Klopp came out and said, this guy is incredible and very, very difficult to deal with. It feels like he's suffering from a bit of a lack of confidence at the moment. And people will say, actually, what you're suggesting would do further damage. And what I'm suggesting is taking him out of the team. I actually think it will do him good. Get him out of the spotlight for a bit. Take the scrutiny away from him. Put Ebere Eze on that left-hand side. Stick him there. Martin Odegaard played really well in the international break. Can't say that he's been great recently, so that feels like a bit of a turning point for him. Madueke is doing really well at the minute, both for Arsenal and for England on the right.
I'd love to see that, by the way. I think you know, he's obviously in Saka's shadow, and rightly so. Saka is on a different level, but I've always looked from afar. Young English winger that's really direct, great with the ball at his feet. Yes, he's a little bit inconsistent, but he's a wee bairn. You know, he needs time. And I think that he's going to become I think we've already seen him grow in confidence and look at what he did for England. So I think that again, great piece of business from Berta and the club because Saka, unfortunately, has had quite a few injuries, you know, in recent years, particularly last season. And I think he's primed and ready to come in to have a proper impact.
Yeah, having a player that can come in and give you like for like in a lot of ways. He's not the same level as you've already alluded to, but to have that sort of left-footed right wing option that is a winger and can take people on and beat people and get to the byline, I think is really, really important. I got to be honest, when we first heard of that deal, I was a bit like, oh, come on. Like, is that really? And as I said at the time, if Arsenal went out and did the business aside from that I felt was necessary, my view on the Madueke deal would change.
Definitely.
At that time, we didn't have a striker.
Yeah.
We hadn't bought Eberechi Eze. And you're sitting there and you're going, we're hearing that Arsenal can't pay X amount for this player, but they're going to spend 50 million on Madueke. So I understand why there was frustration at the time. But there was also a podcast I did, I think, the day after the signing was confirmed. And I said, whatever my view on it was, it's done now. Draw a line under it, get behind him, support him. He's an Arsenal player. And he's one of us now, and that's it. But yeah, he's done really well. It's been good to see him come into it. And also, you've got people like Ethan Nwaneri there. You've got even Max Dowman comes off the bench and gets people off their seats. Like, there are options there now. And that's why I want to see Mikel Arteta go, look, we are a good defensive side. We are a good defensive unit. I understand prioritizing that at Anfield, but at home to Forest, play Calafiori at left back, who's going to go roaming. Play Eze on the left-hand side. Let those two go and express themselves. And hopefully we can break down what I still expect to be a very stubborn Forest side.
Yeah, no, I think your analysis is absolutely bang on. I think about the Arsenal squad. I think it's the most exciting that you've had in years. And, you know, you're poisoned with that bridesmaid sort of label, but I just think you've got a stacked squad, and I think that the questions that Arteta has, I think, are much easier to answer than the questions that Arne Slot has. So around what he does with his forward line, I really think that is going to be a complex situation regarding Ekitike, Isak, no Louise. I'm thinking Douglas Luiz because he's a Forest player now, who's obviously gone to Bayern Munich.
Yep.
And so I think that's a real miss for them. I think a bit of a misstep. And so I'm not saying Arsenal, Arsenal definitely going to win the title, but I think that you'll be in it for a lot longer, providing Arteta does what we think he should do, which is loosen things up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about balance, isn't it? And I think that's the one thing that he's struggled with at times. I think he's gone into games, looking at it and going, I do want to stay solid here, but at what point do I kind of say, right, go and do your thing? That's also on the players as well. And I think signing the likes of Ebereeze and Madueke, who will go and express themselves, even when you don't sort of implicitly instruct them to, I think is a shift in Arteta's mindset, because he wouldn't have signed an Ebereeze a year ago. He wouldn't have spent that money on a player that doesn't really have a set position as someone who wants to drift infield, who can play from. He wouldn't have done that. He would have gone and got an out and out left winger. But instead, he's recognised that he needs a bit more flair, needs a bit more freedom, and that's
it's ironic that they're missing Luis Diaz. I know I was saying Louise. Sorry, I'm knackered. But yeah, it's ironic that you now look in a much stronger sort of position in that left side of the pitch than the reigning champions. I think that they haven't got Luis Diaz there. I think they're really going to struggle. I don't think you can stick Ekitike. And I know that Ekitike is very dynamic and versatile, but he's not a winger. I mean, he's about 9'3" for crying out loud. So I just think that might play out to be a little bit of a problem for Liverpool. And as I say, I think that Mikel Arteta has actually got tactically an easier job on his hands to make his squad work for him than Arne Slot.
Yeah, I agree with that. You look at their backline as well. They didn't get Mark Gay in, and I felt like that was the piece that they needed. They're looking really, really light there. So hopefully we've jinxed them and it's all going to go wrong and Arsenal are going to march to the Premier League title. But we'll see. Max, let's round up with a prediction, mate. You can give me two if you want. You can go head and heart if you like. I'll take both.
Okay, I think head says 2-0 Arsenal. Heart says 1-1. And I know that that's not particularly ambitious, but I think just in the context that the club find themselves in, how good Arsenal are, our record at the Emirates. I don't know if this is true, but the aggregate score at the Emirates since we've been in the Premier League is like 15-1. Or in the last 5 years or whatever it is, because I think we played during a cup or whatever. So I think a point would be great for Forest and a really good statement for Ange. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. Bring something back to the City ground. What about you?
Yeah. My head is, I'm going to say 2-0 as well. I feel like Arsenal will do enough. I'm not like, I want to see them go out and put a really good show on and a really good display. But just based on what I've seen so far, and I'm not overreacting to it, but it feels like the attack hasn't quite clicked yet. Those new relationships are still developing. As long as we do enough to win the game and then lean on that defensive solidity that we have, I think we'll be okay. Heart says I want a 4-0, partly because it's Ange, nothing to do with Nottingham Forest, just because it's Ange, and I think there'd be plenty of banter flowing around the stadium if he was.
Oh mate, it's going to be great. It's going to be great, and I hope you all lot turn up and sort of give him some stick as well. Partly because that's a spectacle, but I think as well that'll bring, I guess, gird the loins of the Forest squad and fans a little bit more when there's that needle. I think it always makes it a better occasion. So I hope that's the case, and it will be, won't it? It will.
He absolutely will get stick. I mean, they'll start with you got sacked because you're shit type thing, aimed at sort of him losing his job at Spurs. But yeah, Max, thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know you're super tired. I know you're super busy. I'll probably see you.
I hope you didn't come across as knackered, by the way.
No,
I know I look it. I can see it in my eyes. But if you're listening on audio, then I'm sure it was much better.
Yeah, no, you're all good, mate. You're all good. Thanks again for taking the time, mate. Really, really do appreciate it. Let people know where they can follow you, what you're up to. You do some great work over at talkSPORT. So let people know what you're up to.
Yeah, well, like you, Harry, I host a social on a Thursday, 3 till 5 on talkSPORT 2. Did it live from the City Ground, which was a massive bucket list for me yesterday. Find me on Twitter, which is just Max B Scott. And then, yeah, I think that'll do, really. I obviously talk a lot about Forest, but report on, everything Premier League, cricket, rugby. So, yeah, feel free to drop us a follow. Thanks, mate.
Brilliant stuff. I'll put Max's handle in the description as well, so you can click on it and go over there and give him a follow. Thanks again, mate. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks to every single one of you for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube, audio, whatever. The likes and subscribes and reviews and all that, you know the drill by now. I've banged on about it enough over the last few months. Make sure you check out tomorrow's podcast as well. It'll give you something to listen to on the way down to Emirates Stadium. It's an interview with author Adrian Goldberg, who's released a book called Where's the Money Gone, which follows the money trail and looks into Premier League ownership and ownership further down the pyramid. Really, really interesting. And we have a really good conversation about the formation of the Premier League. And from an Arsenal point of view, we specifically look at David Dean's role in that. So go over, check it out. That'll be out tomorrow morning. And I'll see you all after the game on Saturday. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.